I grew up hearing that Valyria had once been a place where mountains breathed fire and shadows moved beneath the earth. Yet what lingered in my mind was not its splendor, but its silence. The doom had turned a continent into ash, but before that ruin fell, my bloodline carried a whisper that changed everything. Daenerys, the girl they later called the Dreamer, spoke of an ending no one wanted to believe. I remember the disbelief around her, the murmurs that she was touched by fear or folly, yet her vision cut through doubt like a blade. My ancestors listened. They gathered their kin, their servants, their precious tomes of knowledge, and the dragon's 5 living storms bound by blood and fire. They abandoned the shining spires of their homeland for a volcanic island at the edge of the world. Dragonstone was cold, bleak, and isolated, but it waited for us like a sealed fate. 12 years later, Valyria died exactly as Daenerys had foreseen. The world speaks of survival as luck. I know better. Our survival was prophecy fulfilled. When the freehold collapsed into fire, every Dragonlord perished except us. I imagine the sky over Valyria cracked open, mountains dissolving in molten fury, temples crumbling as the ground split wide. My ancestors felt the tremor even across the sea, yet the worst of it had already been carved into the shape of our destiny. We were now the last keepers of a language dragons understood, and the final embers of a civilization that had believed itself eternal. That knowledge shaped every generation that followed. At Dragonstone, my family rebuilt what it could forge: halls carved from black stone, chambers warmed by hidden fires, and high towers designed to look eastward, perhaps in mourning, perhaps in warning. The air often tasted of salt and smoke, as if the island itself remembered the doom we fled. Every night, the dragons roosted above us, their wings beating against the wind, a constant reminder of what separated us from the rest of the world and what bound us to a past none could reclaim. People claim we were destined to rule, but destiny is only a word for choices sharpened by circumstance. With Valyria gone, we were no longer one house among many. We were the last thread of a tapestry burned to cinders. That truth forged ambition as surely as fire tempers steel. My ancestors watched the mainland across the narrow sea, a continent fractured by rival kings and old grudges. Compared to the unified might of Valyria, Westeros looked fragile, like a land waiting to be reshaped. Yet conquest did not begin as an impulse of domination. It began with the weight of legacy. When you carry the last memory of a fallen empire, you do not allow yourself to drift like smoke. You search for purpose, even if purpose must be carved from foreign soil. Dragonstone became both refuge and cradle, a place where dragons grew restless and ambition matured in silence. The island taught us patience. It taught us that surviving the doom was not the end of the tale, merely the opening line in a far greater chronicle. I often imagine Aegon or Daenerys standing on the battlements, watching the sea churn below, realizing that fate had not spared us to hide. It had spared us to begin again. In the years that followed, 2 realities pulsed within our blood: the memory of what had been lost and the pull of what might yet be claimed. We were the last blood of Valyria, the final keepers of dragons, bound not by borders but by prophecy. That duality shaped our every step. It forged unity where other houses would have fractured. It etched pride into our bones, but also responsibility. For carrying the legacy of an entire civilization is not a gift. It is a burden that demands action. When I speak of those early days at Dragonstone, I feel the echo of that ancient fire stirring inside me. The doom had ended Valyria, but it had also cleared a path no one else could walk. From the ashes of a shattered empire, a new story was rising, one that would reshape kingdoms, test bloodlines, and remind the world that fire, once kindled, does not fade quietly. And as I look back, I know this truth. Our survival was not merely an escape, it was a beginning. I remember the moment ambition hardened into resolve. Dragonstone had sheltered us for more than a century, but exile is never a homeland. From its black walls, I watched Westeros stretching beyond the narrow sea, a continent divided by pride, ancient grudges, and kings who clung to crowns carved from old dust. 7 kingdoms, they called themselves, though unity was only a word whispered in their songs, not in their politics. What I saw was a land fractured enough to be reshaped, yet strong enough to demand a will forged in fire. Aegon carried that fire within him. He was not merely heir to a doomed empire. He was the vessel of a new vision. I witnessed how he studied maps, not like a conqueror seeking plunder, but like a ruler searching for balance. When he traced the rivers and mountains with his fingertips, I sensed he was not planning a war of destruction. He was crafting a realm that had not yet existed. The first move was small, almost quiet. Aegon chose a patch of coastline at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush as the place where destiny would take its first breath. No one understood why that barren shore appealed to him, but I did. It faced the sea like a threshold to the future. When our ships landed and our banners unfurled, it was not thunder, but intent that filled the air. Then the dragons descended. Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes darkened the sky, their roar echoing across the land. Many say conquest began with fire, but I remember it began with awe. Even before the first battle, Westeros knew something had shifted. It was no longer 7 kingdoms facing a foreign invader. It was a continent confronting the last legacy of Valyria. Our first challenges rose quickly. The kings of the Reach and the Rock joined forces, believing their combined strength could crush our foothold before it rooted. I recall standing behind Aegon as the 2 great hosts marched, banners glinting in the sun. Their confidence felt heavy in the air. But dragons do not yield to numbers. On the field of fire, the world witnessed what Valyria had once commanded with ease. When the dragons swept low, their flames merged into a blazing storm that twisted the battlefield into a memory of the doom itself. The cries of men and the shattering of steel faded beneath the roar of wings. Victory was swift, decisive, and terrifying. Yet Aegon did not revel in devastation. He accepted the oaths of the defeated with a solemnity that revealed his true purpose. Not to destroy kingdoms, but to forge them into something greater. But conquest was never a straight path. Dorne resisted us with a defiance that surprised even the dragons. Their warriors vanished into deserts, striking swiftly and retreating deeper into sands that swallowed armies whole. I remember Rhaenys returning from missions with dust in her hair and a shadow in her eyes. She spoke of a people who fought not for pride, but for survival. The desert itself fought with them. Even Meraxes could not tame its shifting heart. We won castles only to find them empty. We seized towns only to watch them reclaimed by nightfall. The Dornish did not challenge our strength. They challenged our patience. That war carved an understanding into me. Some victories require more than fire. They require time. And sometimes, time demands sacrifice. When Rhaenys fell in Dorne, the air at Dragonstone seemed to lose all warmth. Her death marked a fracture no dragon could mend. Aegon's rage burned hotter than Balerian's breath, but even fury bowed to the limits of desert warfare. Peace came not through fire, but through a letter whose contents only Aegon knew. I saw the way he held it, the way silence wrapped around him. Conquest demands strength. Rule demands restraint. When the final crowns bent before him, Aegon took his seat upon the Iron Throne, a monument forged from the swords of those who once defied him. I watched him ascend its jagged steps, each blade whispering the cost of unity. That throne was never meant to be comfortable. It was a reminder that power must be held with vigilance, not indulgence. As the seven kingdoms knelt, the realm did not merely gain a king, it gained a spine. The rivers, mountains, and cities that once stood apart now beat with a shared pulse. Aegon became the first ruler of a land bound not by conquest alone, but by the promise that chaos could be shaped into order. And as I reflect on those early years, I understand the truth that lingers beneath every tale of fire and victory. A kingdom is not built by destruction. It is built by those who endure the burden of uniting what was once broken. The Iron Throne was never a seat of comfort, and I learned this truth the moment I watched the first of our kings take his place upon it. The blades twisted and fused beneath him were not trophies. They were reminders that rule demanded vigilance. Aegon's reign formed the spine of the realm, but the generations that followed shaped its heartbeat. As I observed each successor rise, I understood that being a dragon king required more than fire. It demanded judgment, strength, and a mind unclouded by fear. Yet the gods, in their strange humor, rarely grant such gifts without shadows. Every Targaryen carried the spark of greatness, but also the whisper of instability. I felt this duality like a pulse beneath the skin, steady yet unpredictable, as if every new heir balanced on a coin that could flip at any moment. I think often of Jaehaerys, the king who proved that stability can be a triumph greater than conquest. His reign stretched across decades like a calming tide. He mended rifts, settled disputes, and breathed order into a kingdom still raw from unification. He taught me that a peaceful king is not weak. He is simply wise enough to understand that power resonates deeper when it preserves rather than destroys. Under his guidance, roads stretched farther, trade flourished, and the realm began to see itself not as seven fragments, but as one living body. People spoke of him with respect, shaped by gratitude rather than fear. Yet, even in such golden years, our legacy remained tied to dragons and prophecy. No matter how much peace soothed the land, the fire at the core of our blood never dimmed. But peace, like all fragile things, invites its opposite. Maegor rose in stark contrast to Jaehaerys, and his presence carved a deep scar across my memory. He ruled with a grip so hard it crushed rather than shaped. Order became oppression, and fear became the language of the court. His victories were swift, but victory achieved through cruelty is hollow, for it breeds rebellion rather than loyalty. I remember how the Red Keep expanded under his command, its corridors twisting like veins through stone. Yet, even as new walls rose, the realm felt smaller, suffocated beneath the weight of suspicion. Dragons obeyed him, but people did not. In his downfall, I learned that a crown held by force alone will eventually consume the one who wears it. Kings came and went, each leaving shadows behind them. Some pursued justice with sincerity, others chased ambition until they fractured under its pressure. The truth, none of them escaped, is that the dragon is more than a symbol. It is a burden that tests the soul. For every monarch blessed with clarity, another fell to the darker currents of our heritage, our bloodline's practice of marrying within itself, born from ancient Valyrian custom, kept our traits strong but also sharpened our flaws. I witnessed heirs whose brilliance shone like a blade in sunlight, and others whose minds flickered like unstable flame. This unpredictability haunted every birth within our line. Mothers prayed for the face of a visionary and feared the emergence of madness. It was a fear I carried with me as well, because no one who bears the name Targaryen escapes the knowledge of that dangerous balance. Even as their temperaments varied, the kings who followed shaped Westeros with an unmistakable mark. Some forged alliances that stitched the realm together. Others broke faith with their subjects, letting pride or paranoia corrode what earlier generations had built. Still, across centuries, one truth endured. The Targaryens remained the only Dragonlords in the world. That alone set us apart. It created expectations, some spoken, others silent, that no monarch could ignore. A king without dragons was still a king, but a Targaryen without them felt incomplete, like a shadow missing its flame. I sensed this tension unconsciously, a quiet pressure that pressed against every choice made in the throne room. The people looked to the crown for leadership, but they also looked to the skies, waiting for wings to darken the sun. When I reflect on that era of dragon kings, I see more than a sequence of rulers. I see a dynasty wrestling with its own nature, striving to guide a realm while chained to a legacy heavy with expectation. Each monarch inherited fire, yet each had to decide how to wield it. Some guarded it with care, others let it burn unchecked. Through triumph and tragedy, the realm learned that strength without wisdom is as dangerous as weakness without courage. And as these kings rose and fell, the world saw the truth behind the sigil we carried. 3 heads, 3 fates, 3 reflections of the same fire. Our history was never shaped by dragons alone. It was shaped by the hearts of those who dared to ride them. I felt the first fracture in our bloodline long before the realm realized it. The tension was subtle at first, a quiet shift in the air whenever Daemon Blackfyre entered a hall. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew he deserved more, and perhaps that was the truth that set everything in motion. Daemon was born of a different branch of our family, yet he possessed the physical traits that the songs adored. Silver gold hair, the fire-lit eyes of Valyria, and a presence that commanded attention without effort. When the sword Blackfyre passed into his hands, the realm felt the tremor even if they denied it. That blade had been the symbol of kingship since Aegon the Conqueror first wielded it. The moment Daemon claimed it, whispers began to coil through the corridors like smoke. I watched the tension grow, fed not only by lineage but by pride and fear. Aegon the Unworthy had legitimized all his bastards in his final days, a gesture made more from spite than justice. Kings should unite their houses, not shatter them. Yet that decision carved a wound no healing could mend. Daeron, the rightful heir, ruled with measured thought and a diplomat's hand. He embraced peace, especially with Dorne. But peace is a flame that flickers when too many voices blow against it. Many lords resented the alliance, believing it diluted our strength. They looked at Daemon and saw a warrior shaped for battle, a man who could lead them through war with certainty rather than negotiation. I watched their loyalties drift like tides toward him, pulled by the promise of power masked as honor. The first rebellion erupted, not from sudden fury, but from years of unspoken resentment. When Daemon finally raised his banner, the 7-headed dragon of Blackfyre snarled in defiance of the three-headed sigil of House Targaryen, brothers dividing the realm. There is no grief sharper than watching bloodline turn against itself. I remember the dread that settled in my stomach as armies moved, not as protectors of the realm, but as symbols of a civil war breathing itself alive. People who once stood side by side now faced each other on battlefields lined with fear. Daemon fought with unmatched brilliance. Even his enemies admitted that his courage bordered on legendary. Yet, courage alone does not guarantee victory. The battle that decided everything burned itself into my memory. The Redgrass Field. The air tasted of dust and iron, and the sun seemed too bright, as if the sky itself refused to look away. Daemon charged at the head of his forces, Blackfyre cutting through the air with deadly grace. For a moment, I thought the coin had flipped in his favor, that fate would grant him the throne through sheer will. But fate respects no warrior, no matter how fierce. When Bloodraven's arrows flew, guided by an eerie precision many still whisper about, they found their mark. Daemon fell. His sons fell with him. The rebellion collapsed around their deaths, leaving only silence and the bitter knowledge that the realm had bled for a conflict that should never have begun. I sensed the first tremor of decline, long before the realm dared whisper it. Our dynasty had weathered rebellions, invasions, and the slow extinction of dragons, yet the true danger rose from within. Glory fades not in a single moment, but through a series of fractures too small for most eyes to see. I felt those fractures widening with each passing reign. Kings who should have been guardians of the realm became captives of their own flaws. What began as subtle missteps hardened into patterns of instability, and those patterns, once rooted, reshaped the entire foundation of our rule. I learned painfully that a crown can amplify wisdom, but it magnifies weakness twice as fast. And when weakness grows unchecked, it becomes the prelude to madness. There were kings whose intentions were noble, yet intentions alone cannot steer an empire. Some sought justice but drowned in indecision. Others reached for greatness but lacked the discipline to sustain it. I watched monarchs who once stood tall become shadows of themselves, haunted by fears no one else could see. Paranoia crept through the Red Keep like a cold draft, subtle at first, then relentless. Decisions, once grounded in logic, were now shaped by whispers and imagined conspiracies. A ruler who fears his own advisers cannot rule. He merely survives from hour to hour. The court adjusted to these shifts the way people adjust to a sudden storm, quietly, cautiously, hoping the worst would pass. But storms fueled by the mind do not pass easily. They intensify. Among these troubled rulers, none cast a longer shadow than the king whose reign defined the final stage of our decline. I watched his transformation unfold with a sense of dread I could not ignore. At first, he displayed the charm and energy that often comes with youth. The realm welcomed him with optimism, believing he would restore the stability of past generations. Yet, the confidence that lit his early years dimmed as pressure tightened around him. A ruler must balance authority with humility, vision with restraint. He lacked this balance, and without it, every challenge became a wound, every disagreement an insult. His mistrust deepened until it reached even those closest to him, poisoning relationships that should have been anchors. The more isolated he became, the more unpredictable his decisions grew. Fear shaped his thoughts, and once fear takes root, it feeds on itself. I remember the way he fixated on threats that did not exist, questioning loyalties that had never faltered. Advisors who attempted to steady him were dismissed or humiliated. The court, once vibrant, fell silent under his gaze. Even the smallest gesture could be interpreted as betrayal. I stood in rooms where the air felt thick with tension, where servants moved as if afraid their footsteps might trigger disaster. It was a strange, painful thing to witness. A man with the potential for greatness slowly unraveling before the eyes of his own kingdom. What made the decline unbearable was not just the king's unraveling mind, but the growing dissonance between crown and realm. Westeros needed leadership. Instead, it received commands shaped by suspicion. Conflict flared where peace should have held firm. Old alliances strained under erratic decrees. The people felt the shift, though many could not name it. They sensed instability rippling through the court, and the realm began to mirror the turmoil of its ruler. When trust erodes, even small failures gain the weight of catastrophe. And as the cracks in leadership spread, the kingdom's once unshakable foundations trembled. By the time rebellion finally rose, the outcome felt inevitable. A ruler must inspire unity, yet unity cannot be forced through fear. I understood then that madness is not a single moment of collapse. It is a slow erosion of clarity, a steady drift away from reality until truth becomes unrecognizable. The final years of our rule were marked by decisions no reason could justify. And when the end came, it did not arrive as a sudden shock, but as the final chapter in a story that had been unraveling for decades. I carry the memory of that descent like a weight across my shoulders, for it taught me a painful truth. A dynasty does not fall because one king fails. It falls because too many ignored the signs that failure was coming. And by the time those signs can no longer be ignored, the fire that once defined us has already dimmed beyond saving. Exile is not a single moment of departure. It is a slow unraveling of everything familiar. I felt that unraveling begin the night the gates of King's Landing fell, and the fires of rebellion swallowed the throne that had defined my bloodline for nearly 3 centuries. The Red Keep, once the heart of our power, became a place of echoing footsteps and hurried whispers. The air grew heavy with the knowledge that our dynasty had reached the edge of its story. I remember the fear more clearly than the noise of battle. Fear does not crash like steel, it settles like frost. When we fled the city, we did not flee as conquerors retreating from a failed campaign. We fled as remnants of a legacy collapsing under its own weight. That truth clung to me as we crossed the dark waters of the Blackwater Bay, leaving behind the only home I had ever known. Dragonstone should have been a sanctuary, yet it felt like an echo of the doom my ancestors once escaped. The island was cold, its stone walls steeped in memories of both triumph and tragedy. My family had built their future there once. Now I walked those halls knowing we were only passing through, shadows in a place meant for rulers, not refugees. Viserys clung desperately to titles we no longer possessed, repeating his claim like a prayer he hoped would reshape reality. I understood his fear, though I could not share his illusions. A crown without a kingdom is weightless, and weightlessness is its own form of grief. Our last loyalists dwindled, hope frayed, and the storm that marked Daenerys' birth shattered the last remnants of our fleet. Even nature seemed to push us farther from the life we once held. Leaving Dragonstone was not a decision. It was a necessity. The walls could no longer protect us, and loyalty had become a currency too rare to trust. We crossed the narrow sea with little more than our names and the fading promise of a dynasty that once commanded dragons. Essos greeted us with bustling ports, languages I struggled to understand, and faces that looked at us not with reverence, but with calculation. In Pantos, Bravos, Mir, and Tyrosh, we found shelter only as long as our presence was useful to someone else. The free cities do not bow to lost kings, they bargain with them. I learned to navigate those bargains, to read the intentions hidden behind smiles, to understand that survival required adaptation, not pride. Viserys, however, clung to the past as though letting it go would erase who he was. His desperation grew sharp enough to wound those around him, including his sister, who bore the burden of exile with a quiet resilience he never understood. Years passed in a blur of rented rooms, borrowed coin, and shifting alliances. We were called guests, but the word held the same fragility as thin glass. A single political shift could shatter our safety. I watched Viserys age faster than his years, consumed by the belief that the world owed him restoration. His anger burned constantly, a small flame trying to mimic the fire of our ancestors. Daenerys, in contrast, carried herself with a calm that unsettled me. While Viserys fought against reality, she absorbed it. She listened, observed, adapted. In her silence, I sensed the stirrings of a strength that did not echo the past, but reimagined it. Even before dragons returned to the world, she possessed a kind of fire no one else noticed. The turning point came when we aligned ourselves with those who saw opportunity in our desperation. The arrangement that bound Daenerys to Khal Drogo was not forged from affection but from necessity. I understood the logic. Power requires allies, and allies require sacrifice. Yet, as I watched Daenerys take her place among the Dothraki, I realized she was stepping into a destiny neither her brother nor I could shape. Exile had transformed her. Where Viserys clung to what we had lost, she began to see what she could build, and when Viserys fell, when his own desperation consumed him, I recognized the harsh truth that exile reveals the core of a person. Some break, some endure, and some rise. Daenerys did more than rise. She transformed the meaning of our survival. As I reflect on those years across the narrow sea, I see exile not as a punishment, but as a crucible. It stripped away illusions, exposed our fractures, and demanded resilience. We lost a kingdom, but in losing it, Daenerys found her path. The realm had cast us out, believing our fire extinguished, yet exile did not end our story. It merely shifted it onto a road no one could control, a road that led a young woman from the ashes of her family toward the unimaginable return of dragons. And in that return, the legacy of our house began to breathe again. I felt the first stirrings of change, not in the sky, but in the quiet resolve of a young woman who had lost everything. Daenerys began her journey with nothing more than a name that carried the weight of centuries. Yet even stripped of titles and legacy, she held a kind of stillness that signaled transformation. I watched her step from the ashes of her old life into the vast plains of Essos, adapting to every cruelty the world threw at her. What set her apart was not her claim, but her refusal to let exile define her. While others grasped at remnants of the past, she reached forward, reshaping herself with a strange mixture of innocence and determination. When the pyre burned and she stepped into the flames, I feared the world would swallow her whole. Instead, dawn revealed the impossible. Daenerys standing unbroken, crowned not by metal, but by the 3 newborn dragons clinging to her like living omens. With their birth, the balance of the world shifted. Dragons had been gone for generations, surviving only in stories and sigils. Yet here they were, small, fragile, but undeniably real. I sensed immediately that they were not mere creatures. They were the embodiment of possibility. They grew with her, fed not only by fire but by the strength of her will. As Daenerys carved a path across the free cities, each victory grounded her identity and sharpened her purpose. She freed the enslaved, challenged those who profited from suffering, and built something resembling loyalty rather than fear. Her decisions were rarely simple, but they carried an unshakable conviction. I began to understand that she did not seek a throne solely because it was her birthright. She sought it because she believed she could remake the world into something more merciful, more just, and more whole than anything our dynasty had attempted before. Yet across the sea, another ember flickered into existence. Aegon appeared not as a shadow of the past, but as a figure shaped by careful hands. Raised in secrecy, trained by those who believed the realm needed a different kind of ruler, he stepped into Westeros with the confidence of someone convinced of his destiny. I watched stories of his arrival spread like rumors of a storm gathering beyond the horizon. Some hailed him as the rightful heir. Others questioned the truth of his lineage, but I understood the deeper significance. Aegon represented a choice, a branch of our shattered history reaching for relevance once more. He moved, not with dragons, but with the weight of strategy and the support of those who believed that a quieter flame might serve the realm better than fire unleashed. The contrast between Daenerys and Aegon fascinated me. She was the storm, unpredictable and undeniable, lifting armies not with promises, but with liberation. He was the whisper, deliberate and measured, gaining ground by invoking tradition and stability. Both carried pieces of the legacy our house had lost. Both believed the future belonged to them. I wondered often whether destiny could hold two claimants shaped by different visions. In the echoes of their rising power, I sensed the old truth of our bloodline. Greatness rarely arrives without conflict. The realm could not embrace both paths. Eventually, flame must confront flame, whether through alliance or opposition. That tension coiled in my thoughts like smoke waiting for wind. As Daenerys's dragons grew, so did the legend surrounding her. I witnessed the world react to her return with a mixture of wonder and fear. Fire has always carried that duality. Her dragons were no longer fragile symbols. They became forces capable of reshaping entire cities. Yet she treated them not as weapons, but as companions, reflecting the intensity of her purpose. With every challenge she faced treachery, loss, betrayal. Her resolve hardened. Aegon advanced with careful steps, but Daenerys moved with momentum forged from survival. She had endured fire once. The world's resistance would not burn her again. When I look toward the future woven by their rising power, I feel the weight of our entire history pressing behind them. Daenerys embodies the raw, unbroken fire that defined Valyria before its fall. Aegon embodies the steadier flame of a ruler shaped by discipline rather than chaos. They are the last reflections of a dynasty that once commanded the skies. Their choices, their victories, and their failures will determine whether our legacy rises anew or finally fades into silence. And as I watch the dragons carve their shadows across the world once more, I know this: the last flames of House Targaryen are no longer whispers of the past. They are the breath of a future the world is not yet ready to face. As I lay the final thread of this tale before you, I feel the echo of every generation that rose and fell under the banner of fire and blood. The Targaryen story is not a simple chronicle of kings and queens. It is a tapestry woven from prophecy, ambition, brilliance, and ruin. I have watched my ancestors soar higher than any mortal should dare, and I have watched them fall in ways only they could. Every triumph carried a shadow. Every downfall carried a lesson. And even now, as the last embers glow across time, the legacy refuses to die quietly. It lingers alive in Daenerys's fire, in Aegon's quiet resolve, and in every whisper of destiny that clings to our name. You have walked beside me through conquest, madness, exile, and rebirth. You have seen how greatness can fracture a family as easily as it can shape a kingdom. Now, I leave the flame in your hands. Tell me, what stays with you after hearing this journey? Which king's rise inspired you? Which downfall struck you the hardest? And between Daenerys and Aegon, whose fire do you believe will shape the future? Share your thoughts below. I want to read every reflection, every theory, every spark of imagination this story has ignited in you. Let the conversation continue where my tale ends.